I'm Bob Safian, and I'm here with Reid Hoffman. Reid, thanks for doing this today.
My pleasure. It's always great to talk to you, Bob, even in, otherwise difficult weeks.
Yeah, so over the past couple of years, you've not been shy about your wariness about Donald Trump as a presidential candidate. You put a lot of money behind that effort. You became a public figure in that opposition. Even on Election Day, you released a video on social media urging people to reject Trump. The country has gone a different way. What have the past couple of days been like for you since Trump was elected?
Obviously, it's this combination. It's this weird place where you're basically hoping you were wrong, right? Because there were a number of folks who I talked to who were like, look, Trump's rhetoric on the campaign trail, is extreme because that's the way he, gets his news and attention and all the rest. And it isn't really going to be the way he's going to govern. So it isn't going to be, crony capitalism with tariff wars. It isn't going to be, retribution to so-called enemies within. It isn't going to be all that stuff. That's just kind of his, media campaigning, and is actually going to, snap back to a, what's kind of good for business. And obviously, I feared and fear that they were wrong, but now, obviously, today, I'm hoping that they're right. And it's kind of weird to kind of have I was making as strong a case I could the other direction, but in this case, I'm hoping that
that you were wrong,
that I was wrong. Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, the stock market sure took off once the results were clear, which is an indication that investors feel like Trump and the Republican Party are good for business. Did that surprise you?
No, not really, in part because the stock market tends to respond to short-term judgments about things like tax rates or stimulus packages or other kinds of things.
Regulatory environment, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And so the general anticipation is that someone who is going to be more broadly laissez-faire business stimulus versus kind of call it, broad-based, lower income community inclusion, that's going to be, that will be, reflected in, hey, it'll be a good time to be a stock market equity holder. And that, we saw that even in, Trump's first presidency, as kind of the initial, takeoff to it. And so, stock markets don't really predict, as a whole, things that are, months in advance unless really everybody sees it.
I mean, one of the things that struck me about the results from the election, it sort of shows that voters have this strong dissatisfaction about their financial situation, even though really, the economy hasn't actually been that bad, historically speaking. I mean, inflation has certainly taken a bite, but the job market is strong. Why do you think so many Americans feel so dissatisfied?
Yep. Well, I think a lot of it's, one, I think most Americans don't really realize the impact of what all this kind of stimulus and COVID means, right? Mm-hmm. They don't understand that that's like when I get a free hamburger today, that makes
it's going to cost me something tomorrow.
It's going to cost me something tomorrow. And they don't have enough of a global perspective to realize that what Biden has actually managed is a lower inflation than in the other developed countries, right? And so they've actually been better off because of it. All they know is that it is inflation. It is harder to, make my bills work. And by the way, of course, one should feel very sympathetic to that. But so then when someone comes along and tells them, this person has totally sucked and kind of messed up your economy, they're like, well, boy, it feels that way. It feels that way because like I it's harder for me to make all the economics work in my life. And I'm on one hand, obviously, yes, that's true. And it feels that way, but you don't actually understand that this is the result of all the COVID stimulus, right? Which, is going to be.
Yeah. I mean, I guess historically, like when you had a job, it sort of meant, okay, the economy was more okay. And that didn't really come through this time around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think part of it is, look, I mean, among the challenges that I have with a set of people within the Democratic Party is to say the most fundamental thing that pays for everything is the success of businesses from small to large. And so you should always be pro-business growth fundamentally in all of this, even as you try to also get, broad inclusion, green climate change, a bunch of other things. It's not business as the enemy for that. It's business as the tool and getting there because you essentially pay for everything. And so the problem, of course, that then because there's this turmoil within the Democratic Party, the Democratic leadership doesn't articulate as a clear pro-business, kind of beat the drum because there's a bunch of people who are like, business is the opponent in this case. And you're like, actually, in fact, it's not business, but there's some businesses that might be particularly ungreen or some businesses that might be particularly having a problem with like, for example, healthcare issues, like tobacco and so forth as kind of social costs. But you have to kind of be there. And since you're not there, then when people come along and say, well, your life is having more difficulty economic because the Democrats in general are quote unquote socialists, of which it doesn't help that some of them do call themselves socialists, that then that becomes the kind of swing vote issue. And I think that's probably the, if one were to make a diagnosis of kind of the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back in, this week's election, it's probably that. I mean, there's still a stack of other issues and legitimate issues around, where it is the notion of gender and strong leadership play into the culture is obviously a legitimate issue and one that we should be, working to improve as our culture, and a stack of other things. But my guess is if the economics thing had been more clear to people, where they had felt that there was more decisiveness, maybe the election would have gone the other way. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot of postmortem quarterbacking, and I'm a little loath to add too much to it.
I mean, listening to you, like, are you from here sort of still focused on the political sphere? Or are you like, I'm just going to return to business? Like, what are your next steps from here?
Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, my whole kind of participation in politics has been a weird thing because I'm more naturally a founder, a builder, an investor. It's what I've spent my entire life doing. And it's only with a kind of a trying to help what I think is the kind of the broader country on what I think the the platforms to making the country stronger are, that I've kind of gotten engaged. And it was kind of a path where I'd find some leaders, both Democrats and Republicans, that I would support. And then as it got kind of more dire, because, I kind of, find that like the importance of truth telling in discourse is one of the things I think is really fundamentally important. And so I was, kind of getting involved in that. I think all of that kind of means is that, it's like, look, I made the kind of strongest efforts in cases I could. And now it's, kind of back to the stuff that I'm much more naturally, that I know that my skill set naturally resolves to, building companies, founding companies, investing in companies. What does AI mean for the elevation of humanity? What kinds of new, kind of platforms like LinkedIn that can help evolve, because, part of it is bringing prosperity to the broadest possible community. What kinds of things can you do in order to do that? And I think that's the focus. I have a book coming out in January called Super Agency, which is, how can AI really increase human agency, give us superpowers, or that is actually, in fact, a kind of an optimistic take. I think that's where, continuing the mission of elevating humanity, but I think that's where the focus will be for a long time.
I mean, a lot of Democrats, folks who supported Harris, are not particularly optimistic right now. You are trying, emphasizing optimism still?
Well, look, I think it's a little bit like I said at the opening, which is now I'm in this weird position where I'm fervently hoping I was wrong, right? And by the way, you don't just sit back and hope. You try to help. Like, I'm going to try to grow things within the American economy. I'm going to try to make stuff, work out as strongly and as best, as they can. And, I think if I were to continue to try to play in politics, I think I'd only have negative influence, because I think it would just be oppositional. So I think it's best to be, trying to add in the things that I can add in, which is, on the business side and on the kind of technology strategy side, on the investment side. And so I think that's where I'll be focused.
So what do you think the future of Silicon Valley will be like under Trump? What's going to change? What is it going to stay the same?
Well, I think it's frankly kind of too early to tell. There's kind of, call it a hope and a fear. The hope is that, just as I was mentioning at the top of the discussion, that, kind of wrong about, kind of Trump doing grifter capitalism with his own cryptocurrencies and only doing the things that kind of benefit him, but rather kind of working towards the whole, like the platform of Silicon Valley and creating outcomes and doing that. And if that plays out, then I think, Silicon Valley can continue. It's perhaps the strongest, kind of current American industrial complex, and perhaps it can continue to really thrive. And, one of the things that I've been an advocate for decades has been, how do we have Silicon Valley thrive and then help the rest of the American industries and country as a way of doing that? And then the fear, of course, is it becomes a kind of a crony capitalist, only things for my friends and not things for my personal opponents. And in which case, I think there will be a real, I think it'll be quelling upon a lot of, it'll be a reduction in the economic outcome. Like, one of the things that I think a lot of people don't track is, for the majority of the scale, Silicon Valley companies, over half their revenue is overseas. It's one of the kind of the very strong exports. And it's like, well, if you're quelling it and kind of screwing it up, you're then causing kind of a reduction of the flow of economics into the country, which, fundamentally, however prosperity gets divided through taxation, through local spending and anything else, you need successful export industries in order to do that. And so like what you want as a country is as many strong export industries as you can manage, of vigor and strength. And I think, kind of our current best is all the tech, and probably, given we're living in a technological age, continues to be such. And so that's part of the reason why you get back to, well, what am I doing? What I'll be doing is trying to build those really strong, kind of American, scale export industries, and then have that, be bringing prosperity into the U.S., and then trying to make sure that as much as we can, I do this both through companies and through philanthropy, like Opportunity at Work, try to get the rest of the country, benefiting from the jobs and economics from these industries as well.
I mean, listening to you talk about sort of not knowing what the next Trump term might look like, might actually be like. I mean, a lot of the listeners on this show are business leaders themselves. And it sounds like you're saying, like, maybe it's a little early to be thinking about adjusting strategy. I mean, lots of businesses are excited about the prospect of a Trump administration, obviously. But is your advice now to sort of wait and see? Are there things that that you think businesses should be looking at, should be thinking about moving on now?
Well, probably the principal thing would be planning on volatility a little bit, right? That's kind of the combination of hope and fear. If probably my direction would be, think of some unevenness. Like, for example, if tariffs actually happen and we have a tariff war that's terrible for U.S. export industry, will reduce American prosperity and also increase costs across a lot of things for folks. So obviously we try to make sure that doesn't really happen. And, where we would see that it would be kind of more grifter capitalism if it's only happening in this industry, like it's happening in a way that would only benefit, kind of certain industries at the benefit of, or certain companies versus other companies in the industry and so forth, then that you're not going to be kind of elevating the whole platform. Anyway, see, it's kind of a prepare for multiple options, I think, is probably the, I suppose, the overly committing,
as you like to say, right? Not one plan B, but plans B.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight about what a Trump administration might mean for the future of AI?
Not really. I suspect that the whole, like, we're going to rescind the executive order on AI is probably similar to the we're gonna throw out Obamacare, right? Which is we actually don't in fact have a better idea, and so we're gonna campaign against it to show why the earlier people were complete idiots and terribly bad, right? But actually, in fact, we don't have a better idea, so actually we're just going to keep doing their idea, right? Because here we are, after a complete Trump term, and there was no repeal of Obamacare, so I think it's probably similar, but that obviously could be different depending on various folks being in the mix and kind of what the conception of AI is. The one thing I would say that I think is what I'm hopeful for is that the belief in the enablement of the American AI industry across multiple companies is, in fact, I think, extremely important. And we'll see whether or not that's what's playing, or if there will be a kind of a crony capitalist play, and obviously hope for
a narrowing.
First,
in other words, a narrowing of opportunity.
Yeah, and fear about the second.
Has the election outcome, your experience in this, like, has it changed your perspective at all about the role that business and tech leaders like yourself should play in politics and in civic activity?
Look, this is obviously a week of a lot of processing because, I was really putting in as much energy as I could to try to articulate, kind of what some really key things about, I think, what an important part of the future vision is. And, and while, it's really interesting that, all said and done, Trump won the popular vote. One of the things to obviously remember is that the even winning the popular vote, it's like a very, like, the country is very divided, right? And so it's a question of how do you get to unity? Because even if you go, well, we won the popular vote by 1 million, out of, 100
hundreds of millions. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not hundreds, but it's probably more like rounds up to hundreds. Right. And so, out of votes, it's like, okay, well, that's winning and winning the popular vote. But it's like there is an entire country here. And so I think that the fact that, look, I think it's going to be important that the tech is increasing, as shocking as it is an increasingly important part of American society, our life, our work, our productivity, our creation of new industries, et cetera. And so tech leaders being involved in essentially what the political discussion is about what this means for us as a society and where we should be going and what it means for, like, how you invest in business is also what your tech strategy is, I think is actually very, very important. I just think we need to get to what I want to get to is a much better discourse about it. And so it's kind of reflecting of, what I think is, kind of the problems with a lot of social media and the problems with, like, I think it was great what Mark Cuban was going on shows. I myself, went on some shows to kind of talk about it, and having discourse, I think, is really important.
I mean, you said you don't want to have like a negative or oppositional influence with the Trump administration, but it doesn't sound like you'd be, I don't know, restrained or shy about speaking out again on any issues that you felt like warranted it during Trump's next 4 years. Are you chastened in that way? Or are you like, no, if something comes up, I'm going to speak my mind?
Look, ultimately, I will speak my mind. I think the precise times where you feel fear of, call it political persecution or retaliation, are times where especially people who have some basis of power need to speak up to give the kind of A, voice to it, and B, shelter. So it isn't that I'm planning on being silenced. But it is beholden, I think, upon me and upon folks to say, look, we're in this boat together. Let's try to make this boat work as best as possible. And precisely part of the reason I was so opposed to Trump was creating division and, like, kind of, anything, the division that leads to, like, the January 6th insurrection, or, kind of, speeches about enemies within and use of the military for that and all the rest, is, I think, all extremely unhealthy for the country, for the democracy, and so forth. But that means that, like, what then my work becomes is like, well, okay, how do I make, what are the tools available for me in the next, 4 years to make the country as successful as possible? What are the things where I can contribute in good ways? And, I just don't think the one should ever adopt let's try to make administration X unsuccessful. I think it's let's try to make the country as successful as possible. And I think that's, part of, I think, can be great about business and American business. That's the thing that I will, be trying to do. And my tools will be, creating the next generation of kind of hopefully amazing and industry transforming tech companies. So that's what I think the play looks like. But of course, like if it's like, oh look, it's a whole bunch of really crappy tariffs, I'll comment on it, in the same way that I got a bunch of grief for commenting on, Lena Khan's tech and M&A strategy, because talking about what I think is important for the health of the country is something I'll do when I think it's useful or helpful for me to do so.
Mm. I mean, I guess one of the things, we're at a point where it could be that the White House and both houses of Congress are controlled by the same party, which doesn't happen very often in American history. And the checks and balances that are part of our system may be more leaning one way. And I'm just curious if you feel like, business leaders and businesses like play a role in that checks and balances process, sort of, in terms of what's at stake for the country and that prosperity that you talk about?
I think this is one of the things I think people misunderstand about business, businesses are actually made to be very adaptable. They're made to adapt to customer and market demands. They're made to adapt to, employee, kind of culture actions. They're made to adapt to shareholder interest and demands, kind of as the kind of lowest common denominator across them, and to be broad based on it. They're made to be adaptable to regulatory and government pressure. Businesses are not bulwarks against, kind of antagonistic political pressure. That's the whole hey, a whole bunch of my customers are both Democrats and Republicans. Hey, a whole bunch of my shareholders are both Democrats, and so they're adaptive. They're not like the check and balance. They're this is what the rules are. Okay, great, we'll follow these rules, right? And if you say on the rules are chaos, then the answer is okay. Well, then we're going to be very cautious and we're not going to invest very much, right? If you have really antagonistic rules or very broken rules. And that's part of my worry about, kind of, crony or grifter capitalism is it causes an enormous quelling across the entire ecosystem. And so it's like, no, that's why we want rule of law. That's why we want to be encouraging everyone to be building stuff, because it matters. And it's also one of the reasons why, bad regulation can be really bad. And part of the, kind of, when I speak out against that. And so anyway, so that's that's, I don't think expecting business to be, I think it'll be a, hey, look, our voice, in as much as we have one, is let's just allow a bunch of business to prosper. But on the other hand, of course, you can get regulatory capture by large industries or by industries that have disbalanced, or companies that have disbalanced political power and other kinds of things. And, then that can create, problems.
Mm. Yeah, no, I guess I feel like for a generation of people, you being part of it in some ways, sort of making the decision that you could have more impact on the future as a business leader than maybe going into the political or civic realm. And I wonder whether you feel like that is shifting at all?
Well, look, I do think it's important. I think business leaders are leaders. And I do think that even when it's kind of an unpopular opinion, e.g. speaking up against political power that might retaliate against you, is, I think, when you have a bunch of wealth and position and power, if you're not the one who's willing to speak up, then because courage is easier for you, right? So have that courage, I think, is really important. But on the other hand, also, of course, one of the things that people have to realize is that kind of businesses are responsive are made to be responsive to the environments that they're in, right? They're not like, we're like, for example, in this moment, a bunch of Democrats, people within the Democratic Party are hoping like, oh, business will stand up to oppose the Trump agenda. And the answer is broadly, the answer is like, how do we continue to make our businesses thrive and prosper, which will mean for jobs and a bunch of other stuff. And so what's the environment for doing that is the primary question that they should and will be asking. Yeah, and look, I think fundamentally, as per the optimism point that you asked about and made earlier, look, I think optimists are what build the world. And so you ultimately have to, in whatever circumstance of adversity, this is the folks who may feel particularly disheartened, is like, okay, how do I may think that things are going to get turbulent and difficult, but how do you build positively? Is in each case the question you need to be asking. And that's, I think that's always available, no matter how challenging times can become.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Reid. Thank you. Thanks for coming on and sharing with us.
Bob, always a pleasure. And I suspect we'll be talking again soon.
Amen. Thank you.